Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. We are so excited to introduce Drummond's new FHIR client testing and certification program. Today, you will hear from John Valukovich, Drummond's Director of Programs. John has been with Drummond for close to 5 years and has been in healthcare IT for 30. He began his health IT career at Meditech, where he spent over 20 years in various technical and managerial capacities. Thereafter, he spent a few years in the storage sector and was an independent consultant specializing in O&C compliance and clinical archive product management. You'll also hear from Timothy Bennett, Drummond's Director of Strategic Healthcare Initiatives. Tim has been with Drummond for over 17 years after careers in nuclear engineering and software development, particularly in the area of secure data exchange over the internet. After 10 years in Drummond's O&C accredited test lab testing health IT applications, Timothy has led the development of Drummond's Pediatric Health IT Certification Program and the Payer and Patient Access FHIR Certification Program. Before I pass it over to John and Tim, I want to point out the QR code that you're going to see at the bottom right corner of your screen. If you scan that with your phone's camera, it will lead you to a page to book a free, no obligation consultation with one of our FHIR experts to answer any questions that you might have about topics such as our new program that we're going to talk about today, O&C and CMS federal regulations, patient and provider data access, and so much more. Lastly, John and Tim will take your questions at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to ask them in the comments throughout the webinar. Now I will pass it over to John and Tim.
Great. Thank you, Lynn, for the introductions. Pleasure to be working with my colleague, Tim Bennett. I want to welcome everybody to our FHIR Client Testing and Certification Program overview. So you did hear a bit about us through Lynn on the introductions, and I'm going to move right over to the agenda that we'll cover over the next 30 or so minutes. So briefly, again, many of you are aware of Drummond and our presence in the industry, but a quick primer for those that may be less familiar. A bit of a program overview, as one would expect, about this FHIR Client Testing and App Certification Program. The benefits of the program, how you can get started here at Drummond, whether you're a present customer or perhaps will be a new one. And then, as Lynn had stated earlier on, we'll follow it up with some questions and answers and give you information about how to find out more about this program on our Drummond website. So without further ado, just as an awareness, many of you know us as the premier O&C testing and certification body. We're fortunate to have 83% of the certified EHRs have gone through and continue to go through Drummond for O&C testing. But some of you may not know, as Drummond was started back in 1999 as a pioneering administrator of B2B interoperability testing. And that continues today with AS2 testing with the major e-commerce vendors. Over the years, it has made sense that, as you can see here, Drummond has complemented our O&C certification offering with others that are centered in healthcare compliance, training, ranging from technology to policy assessments, and we are supported by a consulting division. So we are really ready to assist and equipped no matter where in the healthcare IT compliance lifecycle you might find your organization. More about that on Drummond.com. What I'd like to do now is sort of tee up. Many of you know Tim, well-versed in the industry, attends a lot of connect-a-thons, trade shows, has a lot of great contacts in the industry, has really helped build the Drummond testing and certification business. I'm going to hand it over to Tim to talk a little bit about our comprehensive FHIR testing and certification program, how we're building it up, and how we're going to move forward with a program such as the one that I'll deal with in the next couple of slides. So Tim, if you don't mind, a couple of minutes on our FHIR testing and certification, sort of history and where we're going over the next little bit, please.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate it. And I'm excited to share with the audience today. I think with the release of FHIR R4 and then the subsequent, regulation from O&C and CMS back in 2020, those regulations, among other things, called out the requirements of FHIR APIs for both providers and payers for patient access to their data. Drummond sort of saw the new future of health data interoperability would be focused on FHIR and its ongoing proliferation of use cases. Certainly, our existing O&C test lab and certification body would facilitate health IT testing and certification for O&C's patient access and their bulk data FHIR requirements for EHRs and providers, We started that up in 2020, and that continues even after the deadline at the end of 2022 for providers to have EHRs with that FHIR functionality in it. But also concurrent to the cures rule, CMS also in 2020 released their final rule, which required payers to likewise make FHIR APIs for member or patient access available as well. But unlike ONC, they did not mandate a certification program for the payers. And as a result, Drummond saw that as sort of a gap in the industry, a need for the industry, and we developed and launched our own voluntary certification program for payers and payer systems and their patient access implementations, not only of clinical data like the providers have to, but also the claims data for their members, and then access to provider directories and drug formularies for patients and members, all through FHIR APIs. And Drummond has been testing and certifying those systems now for the last few years. And now, the next increment in the Drummond portfolio of FHIR testing is this certification program for FHIR clients and apps, which John is as he said, is gonna delve into here in just a moment. But as we sort of look ahead and peer into the future of FHIR, we know that there are more regulations coming, particularly with FHIR-based prior authorization workflow reform, and that's going to impact both payers and providers. Also, payer data exchange, provider access to payer data, and then the patient cost transparency, which addresses the congressional's No Surprises Act. That requires providers and payers to work together to provide patients with good faith estimates and advanced EOBs of services before they're performed. So all of this is likely and will be on FHIR technology, and to some degree we'll see federal regulation of it. So now I think with that sort of peer into the future, and Drummond is going to be here to continue to provide certification services for what's here now and also what's to come. But let me bump it back to John, and he's going to tell you about our new exciting FHIR client certification program.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tim. Nice little runway. So it is entitled FHIR Client Testing and Certification Program. And in this instance, obviously, as it says, we're really focused on the client. And we've built this program with a lot of input from our EHR clients and even from the app community, looking at the situation in terms of there's a lot of activity around the development of apps and connecting to rich data sources. And the trick here is adoption. And there's a fair amount of hurdles, both that the EHR developers and really payer developers will focus on those two as the rich data sources at the outset here. And even the app developers sort of face. And that's probably why there's some impotence to sort of the adoption. And we feel like maybe if there was something in between there that would help sort of vet and use that activity as our position in the industry to take a look at the FHIR app marketplace. So we have to first and foremost understand what are some of the hurdles. So if I start with the EHR, right, they're the ones in the payers with rich data sources, and you're facing, if you have a good data source, you face an enormous demand from client apps obviously wanting to connect. And there's a fair amount of discovery for an API source, such as an EHR, to perform on an app. Is it real? Are the contacts legitimate? How do I position it and list it for my EHR customers? Is there a viable use case there? Even through the supporting the requisite implementation guides or IGs, right? You still require assistance in a lot of cases to onboard them into your sandbox. Indications from the field and ours with especially G10 through last year was that because of the new requirements around authentication, smart on FHIR, and the data sources and the amount of time EHR spend on onboarding an app, it can be quite significant. These are expensive resources too within the walls of these EHRs and their payer systems, fielding questions and managing the onboarding. It's to understand FHIR and incorporate it into workflows takes experience. And then there's the practicality of the use cases. We'll look at that. The traditional ones where legacy connections might be migrating from HL7 X3X to a FHIR-based client, that certainly makes a lot of sense. But in having an EHR developer understand another bolt-on or an app workflow and what the value add, there's time and attendance and resource spend on that, and that can actually be a challenge. So now let's take a look at, well, there's another part of the equation here, and that is the app developers, right? They still have to contact, connect, test across various sandboxes, repetitive activity. In some cases, we've heard that there's either implementation bias. Again, beyond the base implementation guides, areas such as the metadata, required and non-required fields, and interpretation of implementation guides lends itself to, you might be ready to implement based on an implementation guide, but you may have multiple versions of it when you really start to connect. I know that was my experience in 20 some odd years just supporting HL7 2X and 3X interfaces. And many of the apps don't have larger staffs dedicated to this. A lot of these are really small shops that are really good at what they do and have a really unique bolt-on app, for instance, but they don't have the breadth of resources to devote to what is often a repetitive cycle across EHR sandboxes. And since these EHRs, rightly so, with rich data sources, are contending with the many requests to connect and onboarding, an app developer could wait a little while before some of their questions and answers are given, and thus delaying the time to market. So what are we proposing here? Where could Drummond actually fit? And when taking some recommendations and feedback, we look at this Drummond solution, and we look at a total addressable market of roughly around 1,200 or so viable client apps out there. And one might say, well, where did you come up with that number? There's literally tens of thousands of apps in an iPhone store, in the Android store, et cetera, which is true. But what we're focused on and what research has shown us, when you look at the various app stores and you look at a lot of the information that comes from the sources such as KLAS and HIMSS data analytics and some of the available from Blackbox, for instance, you look at what are the usable apps that deal with provider workflow, patient workflows, and where are the high adoption rates. So we looked at individual unique app stores and processes, and there's an additional differentiator, we believe, in the Drummond certification, seen as a arbitrary third party well-versed in a compliance testing and certification program. You'll note that there's industry validation, going through a sandbox and getting a listing. The exact same process may be 85 to 90% at the next sandbox or next EHR rich payer data source, but it's often not quite the same, again, due to implementation bias. We're looking to be able to say that, well, let's look at the reference guides, implementation guides, and put an app through its particular paces. So the next logical question would be, when you take a look at that, is, well, what are you going to base this program on? And I'm going to break that down over the next slide or two. We're going to start over in this section here and take a look at really what some of the base requirements are for a FHIR-based app. And you look at a base, and these are the ones that are required of those that provide APIs today in time. Tim noted that both in our CMS program and those are well-versed in the O&C program understand that at the base of this is the bulk data requirements and the level setting at FHIR and the level setting at the Smart on FHIR launch and authentication service. So if we level set at the base that's required that these APIs provide, it's both the EHR and pay arenas, right? Based on final rules from O&C and CMS, we can draw a line in the sand there. And we do believe that in terms of what's required on the left for G10 conformance, as well as incorporating an up-to-date standard version advancement process with the implementation guides and requirements that you see on the right, is a good level to start to test apps at. As a matter of fact, you're probably well aware that as up-to-date as this is, even Inferno was up-to-date with testing a lot of these as of the last couple of days. So we had to level set right now at a baseline, and we're going to look at this and say, this is a good place to start to be able to say that the rudimentary onboarding questions, the ability to test in a sandbox that an EHR or a payer would be able to set up. If you meet these requirements, definitely the ones that are required on the left and most of the ones that are required on the right, depending on the industry, then you should be able to be fast-tracked and perhaps onboarded in other sandboxes and have some credibility in the industry that your app is a good actor. We're going to get into a little bit more of that. So as we look at, well, you have a baseline. This is my opportunity to bring Tim back in to say that, as he did earlier in the presentation, we look at the FHIR ecosystem and the compliance measurements that are only going to grow over time and say, well, this program, if you have a baseline, which is being achieved in the industry now to some degree, obviously with the hurdles we described earlier on, what does Drummond envision how this program would grow? Because if we think about it, and it's well known, the FHIR app ecosystem, myriad of use cases. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to transition over to Tim and have him just speak briefly about this slide and the next, where we think about what's our roadmap beyond baseline certification for FHIR apps, whether it's the payer community or the EHR community, and how would we look at badging additional program developments within this FHIR client certification program. So Tim, if I could turn it over to you, and then after this one, I'll have you describe the overall certification process of which you pioneered here at Drummond.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So as John was saying, there's a broad scope of FHIR app use cases, workflows, industry movement, so to speak. And while Drummond sort of had to narrow its focus to launch our client certification program with a specific use case, basically around apps that connect to ONC G10 certified servers. We do recognize that we will, grow this client certification program over time, offer additional badges and whatnot. So I just wanted to kind of speak a few minutes to that, to that intention of ours. So, we'll take cues from the industry as to what we'll be looking to promote adoption of. But some examples would be, we'll be looking at what future regulation might hold in store. Certainly, as I mentioned before, the new prior authorization proposed rule from CMS, it defines FHIR use cases in which EHRs, which in the patient access world are sort of traditional FHIR servers, but they become FHIR clients in this sort of world of provider access and prior authorization use cases that's currently right now a proposed rule from CMS, and we're expecting a final rule, really any time now that will, sort of cement that, those requirements. Also, just calling out the HL7 Argonaut project. It's been a good convener of industry stakeholders. It's done a really good job of putting forth various implementation guides around, patient scheduling, CDS hooks, clinical notes, just to name a few. And while currently the FHIR API space is focused on sort of read-only searches. That's sort of what patient access is these days, whether it's patients accessing their clinical data from their providers or clinical or claims data from their payers. Those are just read-only searches. But FHIR R4 and beyond certainly supports other operations, create, update, delete capabilities as far as the FHIR infrastructure. And if servers support those and provide the necessary sort of, security and safeguards and whatnot, certainly, FHIR apps in the future could, provide value add for workflows that could, write data into a patient's record from their own, from a patient's own app, for instance. So there's lots of potential use cases in that area when we start thinking of things other than just read-only data searches. And then finally, other entities like, we focused on sort of a high activity and market that's sort of the EHR ecosystem, but there's also, challenges that's faced by payers, by clinical trials and research, clinical research organizations. Others that need to exchange clinical data sets, this is and becoming more interoperable. And so FHIR and its ability to support a more precise method of interoperability of data exchange is going to, foster, these sort of additional creative solutions, and with it, there'll be challenges to ensure compliance and interoperability. And so, at Drummond, we'll have our eye on that. So now let me sort of, so for those of you who may not be familiar with sort of the Drummond process of testing the certification, I do want to say that, this new FHIR client certification program sort of uses that same Drummond tried and true methodology for testing and certification from, virtually all of our other health IT certification programs. As with all of our certification programs, it all starts with a flexible customer-driven pre-testing phase that gives our customers access to Drummond's test proctors. These test proctors help customers guide and shepherd them through the process, through understanding what it means to be compliant, the regulations, the requirements, and really assisting them in getting ready for testing. At Drummond, we always, sort of our DNA is that we partner with our customers for their success. Where, we hold everyone, to the compliance standards. But, the way that we sort of go about, helping our customers, meet those standards, we want it to be a win-win for everyone. We're all in this together to, improve, patient access to their health data and improve patient health outcomes. And so everyone benefits when everyone is, compliant and interoperable. And we feel like our, customer service in this area, helps our customers, get across the finish line, so to speak. And that's where everything sort of starts and, really, revolves about. But, so once the customer is ready to test, there is an actual test event or events that are scheduled, and they're performed, and then those test results are reviewed and eventually, certified. And then once products are certified, Drummond performs some sort of, depending on the certification program, some sort of conformance monitoring activities that ensures ongoing compliance as, those products undergoes their own maintenance cycles, their own new version releases, and so that, in the field, we can always, make sure that, customer products are maintaining their compliance. Finally, at least with this program and some others we have, certified products must retest and recertify periodically in order to ensure that they keep up with new versions of the standards and implementation guides. The fact of the matter with FHIR right now, it's still a very moving target. While things have matured, it's still growing, and the implementation guides and the standards are, constantly being updated. And so as a result, we require certified products to come back periodically and retest and recertify to ensure that they're maintaining compliance to the new versions. And I think with that, I'll kick it back to John to finish out our webinar.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Tim. So our program obviously requires a strong technology stack, and we're pleased to have both Arena Solutions and InteropX at Current put forth a FHIR API reference server for use in testing and the certification effort. And what's unique about the program here is this is more than what I would call a one and done. A viable app would want to do in the marketplace today the same thing we're going to put them through the paces here in this program. You will want to certify. You want to get your app listed with more than one EHR or payer data source. So our program has built-in requirements and mandates that you're going to have to test across more than one reference server with multiple sets of data. So it's about as close to as a real-world testing environment as one can get. And what's important to note about the program as well is similar to some of the O&C based testing that requires a visual inspection. Pick on direct messaging and clinical information reconciliation. It's important here to take this program a step further with an eye towards that as an app absorbs data, we're going to actually take a look at that app's UI and ensure that the proper USCDI elements that might be part of the use case in the read from these environments are actually placed in the proper areas of the patient record. So there's that additional check, a reconciliation check, that the app itself is really a good actor, that beyond the security and compliance and leveraging implementation guides, the app itself is actually doing right by the data it absorbs and uses for the next use cases, perhaps a bolt-on or an app that might be on a phone or a tablet. So that's important to note there. I can say that we're in the middle of standing up a pilot program. You can see some of the details there in that we have dedicated Drummond proctors devoted to this program. We have a lengthy pre-test questionnaire review just to the uniqueness of the app environment that's out there. We need to tailor the testing environment to the application. By becoming a pilot, you have early access to both of our testing platforms. So you can almost use it as a test-driven development environment, depending on your readiness. We're going to have a number of different opportunities to test, provide feedback, and prepare you for the ultimate certification event. And then again, upon successful completion, you receive that certification in a listing on Drummond's website, along with our other certified listings. So I can note that I can offer some special pilot pricing, 25% discount with anybody that signs over the next couple of weeks. So at the conclusion of this, that if there's additional interest, I got a couple of pilots already. I want to have a robust group. You can feel free to follow up with me directly after that. So we intend to pilot this over the next month or so. So just to sort of put a bow on this, let's take a look at some of the program benefits in terms of if I'm an app and maybe I've done some vetting with an EHR. If I'm an app and maybe I'm new to the market, is there a benefit from me there? Can I get involved? And the answer really to both of those is yes. So we think about, let's start with demonstrated conformance, right? You want to prove you're a good actor by virtue of testing the abilities to properly adopt recommended implementation guides across, in our instance, as in the real world, multiple reference services or rich API data sources. And then, of course, there's that visual component. There's the trust that's obviously going to get built. And trust is important in this environment where patient data exchange is paramount. Given our well-known position in the EHR compliance sector, and EHRs can leverage and perhaps fast-track approval for an app listing and reduces some of the burden both on the EHR side and the app side, just by virtue of knowing Drummond's placement in the industry when it comes to compliance testing. There's an increased confidence. Think about those of you that are developers. What about your end users, whether they're clinicians, financial users within a hospital group, the IT staff that is probably, again, another gateway, perhaps beyond EHR or a payer for vetting an app. You can knowingly implement and adopt FHIR apps with a lot less worry with that Drummond seal of approval. The efficiencies, I can't harp on this enough, is returning to that hurdle slide at the very beginning, right? By virtue of signaling an app, then there are steps, time, and money that can be saved by adopting Drummond certified apps, whether it's part of an EHR payer API suite or for app developers looking to expedite onboarding with an API provider's interoperability suite. That's another opportunity there as well. Implementation bias. You're going to deal with it throughout various EHRs and payers in the industry. But this program can be a bit of a source of truth that you can point to as how to adopt implementation guides and streamline onboarding with an API. And at the end of the day, it's a marketplace, right? It's all about adoption. And currently, there's a lot of competition among apps to do the right thing with the data and make them available for consumers. And the EHRs, again, are rich data sources. So if I'm an app developer, I want to partner with a lot of name brand EHRs. It just seems like the opportunity is right there. But what you need to be able to do is, this is just one more layer of certification and compliance and really a competitive advantage to prove to those that you want to connect to, you want to market to, that you've gone through this rigorous testing program. So getting started, how would I go about doing that? I'd like to point you to, you can contact me directly, John Valukovich. You can see my email there. You can also visit our Drummond website. You can see drummondgroup.com/services. There you'll see all of our drumming services, and you can look up the information that is currently available today and time for our FHIR client testing and certification program. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'll take a pause here. We do have a couple of minutes left. And Lynn, is there anything, I got a bit of a queue over here. If you don't mind vetting any of the questions, and we can just sort of lob them to Tim and I, and we can spend a couple of minutes going through the questions. If we don't get to them all by the conclusion, we'll note who asked them. And if you have an email address with us on file or want to contact me directly with questions here or additional questions, we'll be sure to follow right back. So, Lynn, is there, would you mind maybe just sorting through what we might have out there?
Yeah, definitely. So feel free to put your questions in the comments right here. But I do have one come in so far. How will Drummond test apps given the variety of apps and use cases?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and the truth is there as well. There are some apps that do similar things, but the majority of apps focus on specific use cases. Others are more of I want to retrieve patient summaries and all. So our goal here is Drummond is going to build this environment, leverage the two reference servers, and we are going to have a vast amount of patient data available built into this testing arena. But the key is the onboarding. We have a detailed pre-assessment questionnaire where we at Drummond, we really want to get to know your app. What is your use case? What is your typical customer environment? And then we really do break it down in terms of there's a lot of technical components for implementing a FHIR app, as we all know. Obviously, it's pretty confined in terms of authentication and Smart on FHIR launch, for instance. But then we're going to get into the detail about what US core version you support, what US CDI versions you support. And then even within US CDI values, for instance, I may just be a hypertension app, and I may only need a subset of US CDI values. So we want to have that explicit information so that we can ensure that really it's twofold. We can tailor a testing plan for that app. And more importantly, almost as importantly, and more so in some cases, is from a perspective of examining the UI and looking at the log and interaction data. We want to be able to show and take a look. I'll call it provenance. That if an app is going to be hypertension, for instance, then there may be some US CDI fields that they shouldn't be asking for. And we'll want to know and we'll want to check that based on this assessment, these are the values that your app is looking to assess, access, and place back in your UI. So there's a big check and balance in there. So that is a very long way of saying that we feel like this program will grow over time. And I think it's as opposed to some other certification programs where you're constrained to a couple of routines and a specific data set. This is pretty wide open. So we intend to learn a lot. And that's why my plea I got a couple of pilots, would love a couple of more, because I have some that are patient-centric in the whole chart, and I have others that just ask specific data. So we feel like this program is going to grow over time. So do appreciate that question.
Great. We have another question here. Can app developers bring their own data?
That's actually a really good question. I'll give it a first stab, and based on what we're doing right now, sort of in the early stages of setting up the pilot. And Tim, you might have a little bit of color on that. We believe that with some of the tools that are available out there, as with our testing in the past, it's important for Drummond to sort of control the data set. And I think that's probably where that pre-assessment questionnaire comes into play, that we feel like with the ability to have complete patient sets and fully vetted and filled out US CDI data, we can probably cover every use case. That we probably, out of the gate, we're not going to entertain data being brought in by an app developer, but there certainly could be a use case for it. And I think we may find out more about that during the pilot phase. I don't know, Tim, I know you've been in the weeds in some of setting up some of the technology as well. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, no, I think you addressed that right. I mean, I think certainly there could be a use case where we would accept or see the value of an app bringing their own data, but we intend to have built-in data into our reference servers that cover pretty much the gambit of of the US CDI, US core data and beyond. And and if we need to augment that, I think that would be something that we would do. But I think controlling the data set was a key phrase you used. That way we can ensure, um, you know, that we can determine, that the searches and whatnot, that the data is coming back and into the app is being used correctly and completely, I guess, is another way to say it.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Any other? Do we have one more, Lynn? We might have time for one more, I think.
It looks like we have one final question here. Is this program in general release?
Yeah, good question. At current, it is not. So we are in the pilot phases, and we intend to entertain pilots between now and the end of the year, with a general release targeted for the end of the year, so everybody can start to plan for calendar year and fiscal year 2024. Would love to have a conversation about scheduling and things like pricing and all. Very low entry level. We feel like this is something that, from a volunteer perspective, this would be a great thing to have out in the industry, and I know would be appreciated by the rich data sources and really app developers. So we look forward to engaging.
So I actually misspoke. We do have one more question, it looks like.
Oh, yeah.
Rita is asking, how are patient-facing use cases different than existing process, such as use of personal app versus EHR?
I'll take a crack at that one. And well, when I say, and I might need a clarification, patient-facing use cases and or in a personal app, I have lumped them in the same as opposed to a clinician workflow use case, which wouldn't be available on a patient portal or an app that you might launch on your phone to get your patient-facing data. There's that use case that there are apps that specialize in giving up the data and access to the data for one patient only, whether it's by that patient or whether it's by an authorized caregiver. So there's that. And then there is the whole realm of apps that are more like for provider and workflow enhancements, that whether it might be a bolt-on cardiology app to an EHR. But at current, we would look at, and it does depend on the assessment process that we do during a discussion if there's interest in the program, but a patient-facing app and its use case right now, it's read-only, and the use of a personal app, same thing. These are read-only download-based apps that allow the user to see their own data, or again, that caregiver, and then they can manipulate it from there. But whether it's patient-facing, whether it is an app that is a lot like a portal that launches from a phone, or certainly where we see a lot of traction and a lot of use cases going forward with efficiency and workflow apps for providers and clinicians, and again, some of the financial activities within the walls of a provider group or a hospital or a large RDN. The program is designed to test all of those use cases. So hopefully that answered the question. If it did not, feel free to, as the email stated there, contact me directly. Happy to discuss it.
Perfect. I think that is it for questions today.
Okay.
So I just wanted to thank you, John and Tim, for taking the time, and thank you to everyone who attended today. You will be receiving, if you did register, you'll be receiving a copy of the recording shortly as well.
Great. Wish everybody a good rest of your week. Thank you.